You know the rule. Keep your head down, take your suppressants, and never mix business with your alpha. I broke the third one, or rather, he broke it for me. I spent the entire corporate gala nursing a watered-down scotch, actively pretending the man who woke up in my bed that morning was a total stranger. I thought I was being smart, protective. Instead, he walked right up to the CEO, pulled me in by the waist, and ruined my carefully constructed life in the absolute best way possible. The problem with a room full of corporate alphas isn't the egos, it's the smell. You can put them in $5,000 bespoke suits. You can hand them flutes of champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. You can stick them in a penthouse ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. But underneath the expensive cologne and the dry-cleaned wool, they still smell like territorial aggression. It's a heavy, suffocating cloud of pine ozone and bitter coffee. I stood near the ice sculpture of a swan that was already beginning to weep onto the linen tablecloth. I took a slow sip of my scotch. It tasted like ash and melted ice. My scent patch itched furiously against the gland on the left side of my neck. I didn't scratch it. You don't scratch a scent patch in public unless you want people to know you're wearing one. And in the mergers and acquisitions department of a Fortune 500 company, an Omega is a liability. An Omega with a target on his back is a casualty waiting to happen. So I took my pills. I wore my patches. I smelled like chalk unscented laundry detergent and absolutely nothing else. I was invisible. That was the goal. Across the room, holding court by the grand piano, was Leonard Hayes, Vice President of Acquisitions, the man who had single-handedly closed the European deal that paid for this entire grotesque party. He looked devastating. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with an exactness that bordered on arrogant. He was laughing at something the CFO had just said, a low, easy rumble that I could feel in the soles of my shoes, even from 50 feet away. He held his drink loosely. He didn't need to posture. He was the most dominant alpha in the room, and he didn't have to push a single pheromone into the air to prove it. Gravity just naturally bent toward him. He was also my husband. The gold band currently secured on a chain beneath my dress shirt felt heavy against my sternum. We had been married for 2 years, mated for 3. We shared a mortgage on a brownstone, a temperamental rescue greyhound named Barnaby, and a life that I guarded with a paranoia that bordered on clinical. I was a mid-level analyst. I worked on the 4th floor. He worked on the 50th. When we got together, I laid down the law. No overlapping at work, no lingering glances in the lobby, no carpooling. I had spent 8 years clawing my way up the corporate ladder, fighting the biological stereotype that Omegas were too emotional, too fragile, or too biologically distracted to handle high-stakes finance. If the board found out I was sharing a bed with the VP, my career wouldn't just end. It would be rewritten. Every late night, every brilliant forecast, every promotion would be credited to the alpha I was sleeping with. Leonard hated it, but he loved me, so he agreed. Tonight, however, I could feel the agreement fraying. I watched him excuse himself from the CFO. His eyes, a sharp, clear amber, tracked across the room. He wasn't looking blindly. He knew exactly where I was. I saw the imperceptible tightening of his jaw when he spotted me huddled next to the melting swan, actively trying to blend into the drapes. I gave him a look, a sharp, brief narrowing of my eyes that said, "Do not come over here." Leonard's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was a promise. He handed his empty glass to a passing waiter and started walking. He didn't make a beeline. He was too smart for that. He stopped to shake a hand. He nodded to a board member there, but his trajectory was absolute. He was coming for me. My heart rate spiked. The suppressants in my bloodstream fought back, sending a dull metallic ache through the base of my skull. I set my glass down on a passing tray. I needed to move. The bathroom, the balcony, anywhere but here. I turned on my heel, aiming for the heavy oak doors that led to the hallway. I didn't make it. Owen. His voice was a low timbre, pitched perfectly, so it only reached my ears through the din of the party. It wasn't a request. It was an anchor dropping. I froze. I took a breath, smoothed my features into a mask of polite professional indifference, and turned around. "Mr. Hayes," I said. My voice was crisp, flat. "Congratulations on the quarter." The European numbers were impressive. Leonard stepped into my personal space. Not enough to cause a scene, but enough that the heavy, clean scent of him cedar and rain on hot asphalt punched through the sterile air of the ballroom. It bypassed my brain and went straight to my biology. My knees felt entirely too warm. He looked down at me. His eyes dropped to the collar of my shirt, right where he knew the scent patch was plastered over the bite mark he had left there 3 years ago. "Mr. Hayes," Leonard repeated, his voice dropping half an octave. "Is that what we're doing tonight? That is my name for you between the hours of 9 to 5 and at all corporate-sponsored events." I muttered, keeping my lips barely moving. "Back off. You're hovering." "I am standing at a professional distance from a colleague." "You are radiating," I hissed, glancing around. "I can literally feel your scent spiking. Rein it in. People are going to look." "Let them. Leonard, I swear to God." He sighed, the frustration breaking through his polished exterior for a fraction of a second. "You've been ignoring me for 3 hours. You didn't wait for me in the lobby. You took an Uber. I had to explain to the doorman why I was leaving the brownstone alone, while my husband snuck out the back like a cat burglar." "We agreed," I said stubbornly, staring firmly at his tie clip. "We don't arrive together. It raises questions." "You are my mate, Owen," he said. The word mate felt heavy, dangerous in this room. "I shouldn't have to pretend I don't know the man I kissed goodbye this morning." "You don't have to pretend you don't know me. You can know me. I'm Owen from Risk Analysis. I drafted the risk reports for your team last month." I took a step back, putting a safer distance between us. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think they're serving crab cakes on the patio." I went to turn away. His hand shot out. He didn't grab my arm. He just brushed his knuckles against the inside of my wrist. It was a fleeting ghost of a touch, but it burned like a branding iron. "Don't run, Owen," he murmured softly. "I'm done playing this game." Before I could ask him what the hell that meant, a loud booming voice shattered the tension between us. "Leonard, there's the man of the hour." My stomach dropped to the floor. It was Richard Davies, the CEO. He was a massive alpha older running to fat, but with the kind of ruthless, overwhelming presence that made entire boardrooms sweat. Flanking him was Thomas Cole, the head of the European conglomerate Leonard had just acquired. They were the two most powerful men in the building, carrying drinks and wearing the smug, self-satisfied expressions of men who owned the world and knew it. I immediately took another step back, instinctively lowering my chin. It wasn't submission. It was survival. You don't stand in the blast radius of 3 dominant alphas unless you want to get flattened. Richard, Thomas, Leonard said. The shift in him was instantaneous. The soft, frustrated husband vanished, replaced by the apex corporate predator. He smiled a perfectly calculated showing of teeth. I was just looking for you both. Hell of a quarter, Leonard. Richard boomed, clapping Leonard on the shoulder. The sound echoed over the polite jazz playing in the background. Just a hell of a quarter. The board is thrilled. Thomas here was just telling me how impressed he was with the transition team. Seamless. Thomas agreed, his British accent clipped and precise. Bloody ruthless, but seamless. I have a good team, Leonard said smoothly. I was still standing there. I was caught in the awkward perimeter of their circle, too close to politely walk away without being noticed, but too irrelevant to be included in the conversation. I kept my eyes fixed on the middle distance, praying to a god I didn't believe in that they would just ignore me so I could slide away into the crowd. Richard took a sip of his bourbon and finally noticed me. His eyes swept over me, cataloging my off-the-rack suit, my lack of an alpha scent, the defensive posture. He dismissed me in less than a second. And who's this? Richard asked, waving a hand vaguely in my direction. One of the new junior assistants. Good of you to mingle with the ground floor Leonard. Keeps morale up. The casual condescension was a physical blow. It was everything I hated about this company. I wasn't an assistant. I had 2 master's degrees and had built the risk models that allowed this very acquisition to happen without violating antitrust laws. But to Richard, I was just a scentless, unthreatening body taking up space. I opened my mouth to introduce myself properly. I had my polite corporate script ready. Owen Harding, Senior Analyst. A pleasure, sir. Leonard beat me to it. He's not an assistant, Richard, Leonard said. His voice had changed. The corporate polish was gone. It was flat hard and territorial. I snapped my head to look at him. Every alarm bell in my nervous system started screaming. No, do not do this. Shut up, Leonard. Oh, Richard chuckled, oblivious to the sudden drop in the room's atmospheric pressure. My mistake. One of the interns, then I lose track of the fresh faces. Leonard didn't laugh. He shifted his weight. He took half a step closer to me, breaking the polite distance I had established. His arm came up and his hand settled firmly, possessively, right in the center of my lower back. My breath hitched. The heat of his palm seared through my suit jacket. It was a glaring, undeniable physical claim. You do not touch a subordinate like that. You don't touch a colleague like that. Thomas Cole stopped smiling. He noticed the hand. He noticed the sudden, aggressive spike of cedar and rain rolling off Leonard in waves. Richard, slower on the uptake, just looked confused. Neither, Leonard said, his eyes locking onto Richard's. This is Owen. I stood perfectly still, paralyzed like a rabbit in headlights. I could feel the eyes of the people at the neighboring tables turning toward us. The shift in Leonard's scent was too loud to ignore. It was rolling through the room, a clear biological warning broadcasted to every alpha within 50 feet. Mine. Richard blinked. Owen. Right. Well, nice to meet you, son. Which department? Leonard's hand slid lower, wrapping securely around my waist. He pulled me flush against his side. I gasped softly, stumbling a fraction of an inch until my shoulder bumped against his chest. I was completely enveloped in him, in front of the CEO. in front of everyone. "Owen is my husband," Leonard said. The words didn't just land. They cratered. The silence that followed was absolute. The polite jazz piano suddenly sounded incredibly loud. Someone at the next table dropped a fork, and it clattered against a plate like a gunshot. Richard's mouth actually fell open. He stared at me, then at Leonard, then at Leonard's hand on my waist. The gears in his head ground to a violent halt. "You're... what?" "My husband," Leonard repeated, his voice smooth as glass but carrying an undeniable edge of steel. "My mate, and for the record, the senior risk analyst who flagged the liabilities in the German subsidiary that almost cost us this entire deal. You owe him a drink, Richard, or at the very least an apology for calling him an intern." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. 3 years. 3 years of lying, hiding, scrubbing my skin raw in the shower to get his scent off me before the morning commute. 3 years of pretending I didn't know the texture of his hair or the sound of his breathing in the dark. Gone. Burned to the ground in a 10-second conversation. Thomas Cole cleared his throat, suddenly looking incredibly uncomfortable. I wasn't aware you were mated, Leonard." "I am," Leonard said. He looked down at me. The hardness in his eyes melted instantly, replaced by a fierce, unapologetic devotion that made my chest physically ache. "For 3 years, he's my everything. I just finally managed to convince him to let me show him off." If I hadn't been leaning against Leonard, I might have actually collapsed. My mind raced through the implications. The HR nightmare, the whispered gossip in the break rooms, the sudden terrifying spotlight that would now follow me into every meeting. They would look at me, and they wouldn't see Owen the analyst anymore. They would see Leonard's Omega. But as I looked at Richard's face, his flush, stuttering, entirely destabilized face, a strange, unfamiliar sensation bloomed in my chest. It felt dangerously like power. Well, my apologies," Richard stammered. The booming, arrogant CEO was gone, replaced by an alpha desperately trying to backtrack after realizing he had just insulted the mate of his most valuable executive. "Owen, a pleasure. Truly, I wasn't informed. We prefer to keep our personal and professional lives separate," I said. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. My voice wasn't shaking. I sounded incredibly calm. I sounded like Leonard. I looked up at Thomas Cole. "And regarding the German subsidiary, Mr. Cole, I strongly suggest your legal team reviews the environmental compliance documents we forwarded on Tuesday. There's a loophole in their waste management protocol that will trigger an EU audit if not sealed by Q3. Thomas stared at me wide-eyed. Then slowly a genuine smile spread across his face. I will personally see to that first thing Monday morning, Owen." "Thank you." Leonard's hand tightened on my waist. A low, vibrating hum of pure pride radiated off him. "Well," Richard said, attempting to recover his bluster. He raised his glass, though his hand was slightly unsteady. To the transition team, and to surprises." "To surprises," Leonard agreed smoothly, tapping his glass against Richard's. They made polite, strained small talk for exactly 2 more minutes before Richard and Thomas practically sprinted away toward the safety of the open bar. As soon as they were out of earshot, the crushing reality of what had just happened settled over me. The whispering had already started. I could feel the stares burning into my back from every corner of the ballroom. I turned, in Leonard's grip, glaring up at him. "Are you out of your mind?" I hissed. No, Leonard said calmly. He didn't let me go. Instead, he stepped closer, forcing me to tilt my head back to look at him. I am out of patience. You ruined it. You ruined everything. My job, my reputation. Your reputation is what own a ghost, Leonard cut in his voice fierce but low. I have watched you make yourself small for 3 years. I have watched you swallow your ambition, hide your scent, and let mediocre men take credit for your brilliance. Because you were terrified. They would think I handed it to you. They will think that... Let them... Leonard snapped his eyes, flashing. Let them look at the numbers. Let them look at the work. You are the smartest person in this building, and I am sick to death of pretending I don't get to wake up next to you every morning. I swallowed hard. The anger in me was rapidly deflating, replaced by an exhausting, terrifying vulnerability. It's going to be awful tomorrow, I whispered. The emails, the stares. I will handle it, Leonard said. I don't want you to handle it. That's the whole point. I wanted to handle myself. Leonard reached up. His thumb brushed over the collar of my shirt, resting lightly over the scent patch. You have handled yourself. You proved everything you needed to prove. But you are my husband, and I refuse to spend another night standing across a room drinking terrible champagne, pretending I don't want to drag you out of here and take you home. My breath hitched. The cedar scent was wrapping around me now, protective, absolute. Take off the patch, Owen, he murmured. I stared at him. Here now. Yes. Leonard, no. It's against protocol. To hell with protocol. To hell with Richard. I want them to know. I want them all to know. He didn't do it for me. He waited. He gave me the choice. My hands were shaking. I looked around the room. I saw the CFO whispering to the head of HR, both of them staring at us. I saw the junior analysts, my peers, looking at me with a mixture of shock and awe. I looked back at Leonard. He was my anchor. He always had been. Slowly, I reached up. I slid my finger under the edge of the medical-grade adhesive. I took a breath and I ripped it off. The release was immediate. Without the chemical barrier, my natural scent flooded out. It was soft, sweet, dark blackberries, old paper, and the distinct, unmistakable ozone tang of an alpha's claim. Leonard's claim. It mixed with his in the air a biological harmony that settled over the space around us like a physical weight. Several alphas in the room noticeably flinched, recognizing the scent of a fully mated, claimed omega, stepping back out of sheer instinct. Leonard's eyes darkened. A possessive, deeply satisfied rumble started deep in his chest. He took the crumpled patch from my hand, slipped it into his pocket, and kissed my forehead. Right there, in front of the board of directors. There. He breathed against my skin. Was that so hard? I let out a shaky laugh, burying my face against his lapel, breathing in the scent of cedar and expensive wool. I hate you, I muffled into his chest. I know, Leonard chuckled, wrapping both arms around me. Come on, let's go home. I need to get you out of this suit. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't care who was watching. I just held on. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. For 3 years, 5:30 a.m. meant slipping out of bed, showering in water, just shy of scalding, scrubbing my skin with unscented soap and slapping a fresh patch over my scent gland before Leonard even opened his eyes. This morning, an arm like a lead pipe was thrown across my waist, pinning me to the mattress. I reached out blindly, slapping the alarm clock into silence. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The reality of Monday morning was waiting for me like a firing squad. "Stop thinking," Leonard mumbled into my shoulder blade. His voice was thick with sleep, a gravelly vibration that usually sent a warm, heavy flush straight down my spine. Today, it just made my stomach churn. "I can hear your brain grinding from here." "I have to get up," I said. "I have to catch the train." "We are driving." Leonard's grip tightened. "Together. In my car. Like normal married people." Normal. Right. There was nothing normal about pulling into the executive parking garage of a multinational finance firm in a sleek black Audi sitting shotgun next to the vice president of acquisitions. When we walked through the revolving glass doors of the lobby, the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. It was 7:45 a.m. The lobby was packed with undercaffeinated employees waiting for the elevators. The low hum of morning chatter hit a brick wall the second we stepped onto the marble floor. It wasn't total silence that would be too obvious, but the volume dropped by exactly half. I kept my eyes fixed forward. My neck felt incredibly bare. Without the scent patch, I felt naked. Worse than naked. I felt loud. My natural scent, dark fruit and old paper, was bleeding into the sterile lobby air, hopelessly tangled with the heavy territorial cedar of the Alpha walking half a step behind me. To the untrained nose, I just smelled like a mated Omega. To the Alphas in the room, I smelled like a giant neon property of Leonard Hayes sign. "Breathe, Owen," Leonard said softly, his voice pitched so only I could hear. His hand brushed the small of my back as we approached the executive elevator. "Your heart rate is spiking. You smell panicked." "I am panicked," I muttered, staring at the digital floor indicator. "Half this lobby thinks I slept my way into my job, and the other half thinks you're committing corporate fraud." The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Usually I would take the crowded local elevator to the 4th floor. Today, Leonard ushered me into the empty wood-paneled executive car. He swiped his key card. He pressed 4 for me, then 50 for himself. "Let them think whatever they want," Leonard said, turning to face me as the doors slid shut. The privacy of the elevator instantly filled with his scent, calming my frayed nerves on a purely biological level. It was infuriating how well he knew my body's responses. "You have the data. You have the track record. No one can touch you." "HR can touch me, Leonard. If HR so much as breathes on you wrong, I will personally dismantle the department and offshore their jobs to a call center in Manila." He wasn't joking. I looked up at him, shaking my head. "You can't do that. You have to let me fight my own battles today. Promise me." Leonard's jaw tightened. The protective instinct in him was raging, fighting against his respect for my autonomy. He reached out his knuckles, brushing against my unpatched neck. The skin there was highly sensitive, and I shivered, leaning into the touch before I could stop myself. "I promise I won't interfere," he said slowly, "unless they give me a reason to." The elevator chimed at the 4th floor. I stepped out into the bullpen. The 4th floor was a sea of cubicles, fluorescent lights, and the distinct smell of stale copier toner. It was my turf. Or it had been. As I walked down the aisle to my desk, eyes darted away. Keyboard suddenly clicked with frantic, performative energy. No one said good morning. I sat down, booted up my computer, and opened my inbox. Sitting right at the top, flagged with high importance, was an email from Diane Miller, Head of Human Resources. Subject urgent. Meeting request regarding corporate policy. 4.2. Conflict of interest. I stared at the screen. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. The icy calm of inevitability washed over me. I grabbed my tablet, stood up, and walked straight back to the elevators. HR was on the second floor. It smelled like cheap vanilla plug-ins and synthetic carpet. Diane Miller was a beta woman in her late 50s with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She operated with the ruthless efficiency of an assassin. "Owen," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit. Close the door." I shut the door. I sat. I didn't offer a polite preamble. Policy 4.2 states that no employee may directly manage, supervise, or authorize the compensation of a spouse or domestic partner. I recited, keeping my voice entirely flat. "Leonard Hayes is the VP of Acquisitions. I am a senior risk analyst for the Domestic Markets Division. I report to Sarah Jenkins. Sarah reports to the CFO. At no point in the corporate hierarchy does my chain of command intersect with Leonard's." Diane blinked. She clearly had a script prepared, and I had just set fire to page 1. She recovered quickly, folding her hands on her desk. "Be that as it may, Owen, a failure to disclose a mating bond with a C-suite adjacent executive is a serious breach of company trust. It creates optical issues." Optical issues. You must understand the position this puts the company in. You recently received a promotion to senior analyst. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air like a bad smell. I felt a cold fury settle into my bones. I received that promotion because I identified a subprime lending exposure that saved this firm $12 million in Q1. A report I drafted entirely on my own, which Sarah Jenkins signed off on. Are you implying my husband influenced that? I am implying that perception is reality in the corporate world, Owen, Diane said smoothly. The board is concerned. Mr. Davies is concerned. We need to ensure there is no unfair advantage occurring. We are going to have to launch an internal audit of your department's past communications and project assignments. They were going to dig. They were going to look for any excuse to invalidate my hard work just to satisfy the bruised ego of the CEO who embarrassed himself at a party. Audit whatever you want, I said. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on her desk. I didn't break eye contact. You will find exactly nothing. I have kept my work completely siloed. But if you launch an audit on me, Diane, I suggest you apply that same rigor to the rest of the floor. Because if I find out I am being exclusively targeted based on my biological secondary gender and my marital status, my next meeting won't be with HR. It will be with the Department of Labor. Diane's fake smile finally vanished. The room went very still. I stood up. Let me know when the auditors need my files. I keep my desk very organized. I walked out of the office. My hands were shaking so hard I had to shove them into my pockets, but my spine was completely straight. The audit lasted 3 weeks. It was a quiet, suffocating kind of warfare. They pulled my emails. They reviewed my server logs. They interviewed my manager, Sarah, who thankfully had a backbone made of titanium and told them exactly where they could shove their inquiries. Through it all, Leonard kept his promise. It cost him. I could see the toll it took on him every evening when he came home. He would pour a drink, loosen his tie, and pull me into his lap on the couch, burying his face in my neck and breathing in my scent like it was oxygen. He wanted to burn the building down. I made him promise to let the fire burn itself out. I had to prove I wasn't just his shadow. The climax of the silent war happened on a Thursday in the main executive boardroom on the 50th floor. It was the quarterly cross-departmental strategy meeting. 50 executive department heads and senior analysts sitting around a massive mahogany table. Richard Davies sat at the head. Leonard sat to his right. I sat near the back, my laptop open, reviewing the final risk projections for the upcoming tech merger. The room smelled like a battleground. Too many alphas, too many competing egos. I was the only Omega in the room, and without my scent patch, I knew exactly how distracting my presence was. I didn't care. I wore a tailored navy suit, my wedding band proudly displayed on my left hand, and let my scent naturally filter into the room. David Pierce had the floor. He was a director in the tech acquisitions department, an aggressive, fast-talking alpha who had always treated me like a glorified secretary. He had a vested interest in pushing this merger through. His year-end bonus depended on it. "The numbers are rock solid," Pierce said, clicking to the next slide on the projector. "User acquisition is up 40% year over year. The target company has cornered the mobile market. We acquire them, now we see a return on investment within 18 months. Your ROI timeline is flawed," I said. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't wait to be called on. I just spoke. My voice cut through the ambient hum of the projector. Heads turned. Pierce stopped his laser pointer freezing on the screen. He looked at me, then his eyes instinctively darted toward Leonard. It was a subtle tell, but it screamed volumes. "Rein in your Omega." Leonard didn't even blink. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and looked completely impassive. He was giving me the floor. "What, excuse me," Pierce said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sorry, Owen, but these are high-level integration metrics. Perhaps the risk department hasn't reviewed the updated user retention models. I have reviewed them," I said, tapping a key on my laptop to mirror my screen to the secondary monitors around the table. "I reviewed them at 3 a.m. when you finally uploaded them to the shared drive. Your retention models are based on gross downloads, not active daily users." I stood up. I didn't look at Leonard. I looked directly at Pierce. "You're ignoring the churn rate." I continued, my voice steady, projecting across the massive room. "The target company has a 90-day churn rate of 65%. They are hemorrhaging users almost as fast as they acquire them. If we absorb their operational debt without factoring in the cost of user replacement, your 18-month ROI becomes a 5-year deficit." A heavy silence fell over the boardroom. That's the kind of silence that follows a bomb drop. Pierce's face flushed an ugly mottled red. His scent spiked burnt rubber and defensive anger. "That is an overly conservative estimate. You're nitpicking the data. Leonard, surely you can see that the market share alone justifies the initial outlay." He tried to bypass me. He tried to appeal to the alpha he perceived to be in control of me. Leonard slowly turned his head to look at Pierce. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Don't look at me, David," Leonard said. His voice was a quiet, lethal rumble. "I don't run the risk models. Owen does. And if Owen says your timeline is flawed, then your timeline is flawed." "But the board—" "The board." Richard Davies interrupted, his booming voice cutting through the tension. He was staring at the data I had put on the monitors. He wasn't looking at me with the dismissive arrogance he had at the gala. He was looking at the numbers. The board cannot ignore a 65% churn rate. Why wasn't this flagged in the preliminary brief? David Pierce stammered, entirely thrown off balance. It was. We considered it a secondary metric. The growth trajectory is a bubble. I finished for him, sitting back down and closing my laptop with a definitive snap. A bubble that will pop halfway through Q3. I recommend restructuring the buyout to tie their executive payouts to a 2-year retention quota. Shift the risk back to them. Richard looked at me. Really looked at me. It was the first time the CEO had truly seen me as an asset rather than a liability or a piece of gossip. Restructure it, Richard ordered, looking back at Pierce. I want the revised terms on my desk by Monday. Good catch, Harding. Harding. Not Leonard's husband, not Owen. My professional name. The meeting moved on. The tension slowly bled out of the room, replaced by the mundane drone of corporate logistics. But the shift in power was permanent. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I had defended it with my own ammunition. Under the table, out of sight of the 50 executives in the room, I felt a heavy, warm hand settle onto my knee. I glanced sideways. Leonard was ostensibly taking notes on his legal pad, his face a mask of corporate stoicism. But his thumb stroked slowly across the fabric of my trousers, a silent, intensely private communication. I see you, the touch said. I am so damn proud of you. I didn't smile. I didn't look at him. I just shifted my leg slightly, leaning into his touch, and turned my attention to the next slide on the projector. The audit would find nothing. The whispers in the break room would eventually die down, replaced by the next scandal. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was an Omega in the executive boardroom, and I had just killed a $40 million mistake without batting an eye. Let them stare. I knew exactly what I was worth. You don't humiliate a corporate alpha in front of the CEO and expect them to just walk away. It violates their fundamental biological programming. I knew David Pierce would retaliate. I just expected him to do it with a spreadsheet. It was 8:15 p.m. on a Friday. The mass exodus of the weekend had emptied the building hours ago. I had stayed behind to finalize the structural framework of the new retention policy. I hit save, packed my briefcase, and took the elevator down to the P3 level of the underground parking garage. P3 was reserved for senior staff. It was a vast, cavernous concrete bunker lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like dying wasps. My footsteps echoed sharply against the cement. I was 10 feet from my sedan when the scent hit me. It wasn't a natural drift of pheromones. It was a weaponized, aggressive blast of sour copper and rotting citrus. It felt like walking into a physical wall. My breath hitched. My biology recognized the threat before my brain did. My heart rate doubled, slamming against my ribs in a frantic bird-like rhythm. I stopped walking. David Pierce stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He had taken off his suit jacket. His tie was loosened. He looked disheveled, but his eyes were entirely focused, pinned on me with a dark, furious intensity. "Going home, Owen?" Pierce asked. His voice echoed slightly in the empty garage. "It's late, David," I said. I kept my voice perfectly level. I didn't reach for my keys. I didn't step backward. Any sudden movement would trigger his prey drive. We both should be. I don't have a home to go back to right now. Pierce took a slow step forward. The sour copper scent grew heavier. My wife took the kids to her mother's. She doesn't like it when I smell like a failure. And after the little stunt you pulled on Thursday, that's exactly what I smell like. I didn't pull a stunt. I did my job. Your job is to run the numbers I give you. He took another step. He was entirely too close now. Not to grandstand in front of Richard Davies to prove you're more than just Hayes's office pet. The insult was deliberate. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to get angry, to get defensive, so he would have an excuse to push back. I didn't give it to him. I looked at him with the same detached clinical exhaustion I used to look at bad data. Your model was fundamentally broken, David, I said, gripping the handle of my briefcase. If I hadn't caught it, the SEC would have within 6 months. I saved you from a federal audit. You should be sending me a gift basket, not cornering me in a parking garage. A muscle jumped in Pierce's jaw. His pride was a wounded, bleeding thing. And wounded alphas are dangerous. He didn't argue the numbers. He couldn't. Instead, he dropped his voice into the heavy, resonant register of an alpha command. Submit. The word wasn't just sound. It was a biological concussive wave. It hit the base of my spine and traveled upward, a chemical command demanding instant, complete physical compliance. My knees buckled. It was entirely involuntary. The instinct to drop to bare my neck to appease the aggressive alpha in my space was overwhelming. My vision swam the edges of the concrete garage, bleeding into black. I hit the ground hard. The rough cement tore through the fabric of my suit pants, scraping my knees raw. Pierce stood over me, a cruel, satisfied smile twisting his face. The heavy scent of his dominance pushed down on me like a weighted blanket. That's better, Pierce breathed, crouching down so his face was level with mine. That's exactly where you belong. You can play dress-up in the boardroom all you want, Owen. But at the end of the day, biology is biology. You're just, I didn't let him finish. The drop was biological. But my mind was mine. I dug the fingernails of my free hand into my palm, pressing until the skin broke. The sharp, grounding sting of pain sliced through the fog of pheromones. I raised my head. I didn't bare my neck. I looked him dead in the eyes. I recorded the meeting, David, I whispered. My voice was shaking, but it was cold. Absolute zero. I record all my meetings. I have the audio of you admitting you ignored the churn rate to inflate the growth trajectory. Fraud. Pierce froze. The smugness drained out of his face. If you ever speak to me again. I continued, forcing myself to rise. It was like moving underwater. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest, fighting the alpha command, but I locked my knees and stood. I towered over his crouching form. If you ever look at me, if you ever push your cheap, sour scent in my direction again, I will email that file to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then I will email it to your wife. Pierce opened his mouth, his face pale, but no sound came out. Suddenly, a blinding pair of LED headlights swept across us. The screech of tires on concrete echoed through the garage. A black Audi slammed to a halt a dozen yards away, parking diagonally across 2 lanes. The driver's side door flew open. Leonard didn't run. He didn't have to. The sheer unadulterated violence radiating off him filled the massive garage instantly. The scent of cedar and rain was gone, replaced by the terrifying, suffocating smell of an apex predator defending its mate. Ozone and crushed ice. Pierce scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet to get away from me. The biological command he had placed on me shattered the second Leonard's scent hit the air. Leonard walked past me without a word. He didn't check if I was okay. He knew if he looked at me, he would lose whatever thin thread of control he was currently holding on to. He backed Pierce up against the concrete pillar. He didn't touch him. He just leaned in, invading Pierce's space until the other alpha was practically hyperventilating. "You have until Monday morning to clear out your desk," Leonard said. His voice didn't echo. It was a low, dead whisper. "If I see your face in my building after 9 a.m., I won't just fire you. I will blacklist you from every financial institution on the Eastern Seaboard. I will make sure you can't get a job managing a fast food register." "Leonard, listen," Pierce stammered, choking on the pheromones. "Get to your car." Leonard's eyes were practically glowing in the dim light. "Now." Pierce didn't hesitate. He turned and practically sprinted toward the far exit. Leonard stood perfectly still, watching him go. He waited until the sound of Pierce's engine faded up the ramp. Only then did the heavy, terrifying ozone scent begin to recede, slowly shifting back to the familiar, safe smell of cedar. He turned around. The adrenaline holding me upright immediately abandoned me. My legs gave out. Leonard crossed the 10 feet between us in less than a second. He caught me before my knees could hit the concrete again. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me flush against his chest. I buried my face in his neck, my fingers gripping the lapels of his suit jacket like a drowning man holding onto a raft. "I've got you," Leonard murmured into my hair, his chest heaving. "I've got you, Owen. You're safe." I didn't say anything. I just breathed him in, letting the steady, heavy beat of his heart drown out the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. The drive back to the brownstone was entirely silent. Leonard kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other wrapped tightly around my fingers, resting on the center console. He drove slightly above the speed limit, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the taillights ahead of us. When we walked through the front door, Barnaby trotted over his long nails, clicking against the hardwood. The greyhound took one sniff of the air, whined softly, and pressed his long snout against my leg. He could smell the distress. He could smell Pierce. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, resting a hand on the dog's head. My voice sounded hollow. "Go lie down, Barnaby," Leonard commanded gently. The dog immediately padded back to his bed by the fireplace. Leonard turned to me. He took my briefcase from my numb fingers and set it on the floor. He shrugged off his coat, tossing it over a chair, and then began to unbutton my suit jacket. "I can do it," I said, my voice barely a rasp. "I know you can," Leonard replied smoothly, pulling the jacket off my shoulders. "Let me." I didn't argue. The drop sickness was starting to set in. Fighting off an alpha command requires a massive amount of adrenaline, and when that adrenaline crashes, it leaves the body exhausted, heavy, and aching. My skin felt too tight. The lingering smell of sour copper was still clinging to my clothes, making my stomach turn. Leonard stripped me down to my undershirt and boxers. He scooped me up into his arms. I felt completely weightless. He carried me up the stairs to the master bathroom, setting me down gently on the edge of the large porcelain tub. He turned on the faucet, testing the temperature with his hand until it was steaming, then plugged the drain. He didn't speak. He just moved with quiet, deliberate efficiency. He stripped off his own clothes and stepped into the tub, reaching a hand out to me. I stepped in. The hot water was a shock, but it felt incredible against the deep chill settling into my bones. I sat down between his legs, leaning back against his chest. Leonard picked up a bar of heavy, unscented soap. He began to wash me. He started with my neck. He lathered the soap in his hands and scrubbed the skin over my scent gland, washing away the chemical residue of the parking garage. He was thorough, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He washed my arms, my chest, the raw scrapes on my knees where I had hit the concrete. The silence wasn't tense. It was necessary. We were recalibrating, returning to baseline. "I didn't submit," I whispered suddenly, the words breaking the quiet sound of splashing water. Leonard paused, his hands resting on my shoulders. "I know." He used his voice. He tried to force me down. "I hit the ground, Leonard, but I didn't bare my neck. I stood back up." "You did," Leonard murmured, leaning forward to press his lips against my wet hair. "You stood up." "I was going to ruin him," I said, a bitter, cynical edge creeping into my voice. "I had the recording. I was going to strip his career down to the studs. You didn't have to save me. I had it handled." Leonard sighed a long, heavy exhalation that ruffled the hair at the nape of my neck. "I know you had it handled, Owen. You are the most terrifyingly competent person I have ever met." "Then why did you look like you were going to rip his throat out?" "Because you're my husband," Leonard said simply. He dragged a soapy washcloth down my arm, and he put his hands on my life. "Competence has nothing to do with it. You don't have to be helpless for me to want to protect you. I will always want to protect you." I closed my eyes. The last remnants of my cynical armor finally cracked, dissolving into the hot water. For years, I had viewed protection as an insult, a condescension. I thought accepting help from an alpha meant admitting I was a stereotype, a fragile emotional omega who needed a shield to survive the real world. But sitting here wrapped in the arms of the man who had just dismantled a rival without a second thought simply because he smelled distress on my skin, I realized how wrong I was. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about biology. It was just love. It was dirty, messy, violently territorial love. "He's really fired?" I asked softly. "He's effectively erased," Leonard confirmed, rinsing the soap from my chest. "He'll be lucky to find work as a consultant in a strip mall in Ohio." I let out a short, tired laugh. I turned my head, resting my cheek against Leonard's collarbone. His scent was back in full force, now clean, grounding cedar. It drowned out everything else in the room. "Thank you," I breathed. Leonard's arms tightened around me, holding me securely in the warm water. "Always," he whispered. "Now close your eyes. Let me wash your hair." I closed my eyes. For the first time all week, the lingering anxiety, the paranoia, the constant need to prove my own worth simply vanished. I didn't have to fight any more tonight. I let the water run over me, and I let him take care of me. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. I didn't take the executive elevator this time. I swiped my badge at the local bank, squeezed in between two junior accountants from payroll, and rode up to the 4th floor. I wasn't wearing a scent patch. The dark, sweet scent of blackberries and old paper followed me, underscored by the heavy, lingering ghost of Leonard Cedar. When the doors slid open, the bullpen was entirely silent. It wasn't the shocked, scandalous silence of last week. It was a dense, heavy quiet. I walked down the central aisle. 2 rows over the glass walls of the Tech Acquisitions Department offered a perfect view of David Pierce's corner office. It was currently occupied by 2 men from Building Security and Diane Miller from HR. They were placing framed photos and legal pads into a standard-issue brown cardboard box. I didn't stop to gloat. I didn't even slow my pace. I walked straight to my desk, set my briefcase down, and booted up my computer. Sarah Jenkins. My manager walked out of her office. She was a beta with a sharp bob and a zero-tolerance policy for corporate bullshit. She stopped by my desk and dropped a massive, heavily bound dossier directly onto my keyboard. The Pierce fallout, Sarah said. Her voice carried across the quiet floor. The tech merger is being completely restructured. Richard wants a top-down risk assessment on the new retention parameters by Friday. I looked at the dossier, then up at her. That's a director-level project, Sarah. You did the director-level work catching the error in the first place? Owen, she replied dryly. Unless you're suddenly too busy being a trophy husband to do your actual job. It was a test. A brilliant, brutal, entirely necessary test. She was giving me the opportunity to set the narrative for the rest of the floor. I didn't smile. I pulled the heavy binder toward me and cracked it open. I'll need access to their Q2 payroll data, and I want an unredacted copy of their severance liabilities. I'll have a preliminary draft on your desk by Thursday at 4. Sarah's mouth twitched. Get it done. She walked away. The spell was broken. Keyboards began to clatter. Phones started ringing. The fourth floor went back to work. I spent the next 4 hours buried in spreadsheets violently tearing apart the target company's financial structure. I was ruthless. I was fast. Every time my focus slipped, I caught a faint trace of Leonard's scent clinging to my collar, and it grounded me instantly. At 12:30 p.m., the ambient noise of the bullpen abruptly died again. I didn't look up from my monitor. I knew exactly what was happening. The air pressure in the room had shifted, growing heavy and thick. The distinct, commanding scent of rain on hot asphalt and cedar rolled over the cubicle walls. Footsteps approached. Slow, heavy, and deliberate. They stopped right beside my chair. I hit save close the spreadsheet and finally spun around. Leonard was standing in the middle of the fourth floor bullpen. He was wearing a navy three-piece suit. He looked like he owned the building, which functionally he did. He had his hands in his pockets, his amber eyes fixed entirely on me. 50 people were staring at us. He didn't care. You're working through lunch, Leonard said. It wasn't a question. I have a deadline, I replied, leaning back in my chair. The tech merger. The tech merger isn't going anywhere in the next 45 minutes. You need to eat. He pulled one hand from his pocket and tapped his watch. Executive dining room, 10 minutes. I raised an eyebrow. Are you giving me an order, Mr. Hayes? Leonard leaned down, resting one hand on the edge of my desk, bringing his face inches from mine. The sheer biological weight of him was intoxicating. I'm inviting my husband to lunch, Owen. And if he says no, I'm going to have a catered steak dinner delivered directly to this desk, and I will sit right here and watch him eat it. A few cubicles down, a junior analyst accidentally dropped a stapler. It hit the floor with a loud crack. I looked at Leonard. I looked at the dark, fierce pride in his eyes. He wasn't hiding me anymore. But more importantly, he wasn't overshadowing me. He was coming down to my floor, standing in my territory, and meeting me exactly where I was. Fine, I said softly, grabbing my suit jacket from the back of my chair. But you're paying. I always pay, Leonard murmured, straightening up. We walked to the elevator together. He didn't wrap his arm around my waist, nor did he push his scent out to claim me in front of my coworkers. He just walked shoulder to shoulder with me. Two equal halves of a whole. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off the stairs of the bullpen, Leonard reached over and took my hand, lacing our fingers together. How is the Pierce cleanup going? He asked, his thumb brushing my knuckles. It's a bloodbath, I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. I'm going to carve them up. Leonard let out a low, satisfied rumble. God, I love you. 6 months later. The winter gala was held in the same hotel, in the same penthouse ballroom, with the same floor-to-ceiling windows. The ice sculptures were different wolves instead of swans, but the air still smelled like expensive cologne champagne and territorial aggression. This time, I didn't take an Uber. The black Audi pulled up to the valet stand. The attendant rushed over to open the passenger door. I stepped out into the freezing Chicago air, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored tuxedo. A second later, Leonard rounded the back of the car. He didn't say a word. He just walked up to me, slid his hand flat against the small of my back, and guided me through the revolving glass doors. We didn't stagger our entrance. We took the elevator up to the ballroom together. When the heavy oak doors opened, we walked in as a united front. The reaction was immediate. Heads turned. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. The scent of an aggressively dominant alpha and his fully claimed, unmarked omega hit the room like a physical wave. My natural scent, dark sweet and entirely unfiltered, wove flawlessly with his. We were a biological broadcast of absolute stability. I didn't head for the corners. I didn't look for a potted plant to hide behind. Leonard steered us directly toward the center of the room. A waiter passed by. Leonard smoothly lifted 2 flutes of champagne off the tray and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed. "Ready?" he asked quietly, his eyes tracking the room. "Always," I replied, taking a slow sip. Richard Davies spotted us from the bar. He immediately excused himself from the CFO and made a beeline in our direction. There was no bluster this time, no dismissive hand waves. "Leonard." Richard smiled, offering his hand. He turned to me, his expression shifting into genuine professional respect. "Owen, good to see you. I read your brief on the Tokyo expansion this morning. Did you find the risk projections regarding their local zoning laws helpful?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "Helpful is an understatement. We're pivoting the entire real estate strategy based on page 4. Richard said, shaking his head. "You have a terrifying eye for detail, son." "He does," Leonard agreed, his voice a low, steady thrum of pride. He took a sip of his champagne, his hand resting securely heavily on my waist. "It's why I married him." Richard laughed a loud, booming sound. "Well, you're a lucky man, both of you. Enjoy the party." As Richard walked away, I let out a slow, steady breath. The tension in my shoulders, a knot I had carried for 3 years, finally dissolved. I looked up at Leonard. He was already looking down at me. The ambient light of the chandeliers caught the amber in his eyes, making them burn with a quiet, intense heat. "You're staring, Mr. Hayes," I murmured. "I am observing my husband," Leonard corrected, leaning in closer. The smell of cedar wrapped around me, safe and familiar. I'm observing how he just commanded the attention of the CEO without raising his voice. I had good data. "You have a spine made of steel." Leonard's hand tightened slightly on my waist, pulling me a fraction of an inch closer. "You don't need my protection, Owen. You never did. I know that now." I looked around the ballroom. I saw the aggressive alphas posturing by the bar. I saw the quiet omegas wearing their scent patches, nursing watered-down drinks by the walls, trying to remain invisible. I remembered exactly how cold that felt. I looked back at the man holding me, the man who had risked his own empire just to pull me out of the shadows. "I might not need your protection," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "But I like your shadow. It's warm." Leonard's breath hitched. A dark, possessive look swept across his face. He set his half-empty champagne flute on a passing tray. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care about the board of directors, the HR representatives, or the corporate politics that governed the room. He cupped the back of my neck, his thumb resting directly over my unpatched scent gland, and kissed me. It wasn't polite. It wasn't professional. It was deep claiming and entirely absolute. The room went dead silent, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. I leaned into him, my hands gripping the lapels of his tuxedo, kissing him back with every ounce of cynical, exhausting, beautiful love I had for him. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against mine. Both of us were breathing slightly harder. "Let's go home," Leonard whispered roughly. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go." We walked out of the ballroom together, leaving the whispers behind us. They could talk all they wanted. I wasn't just Leonard Hayes' Omega, and he wasn't just my Alpha. We were everything, and we were finally entirely our own. And that concludes the intense, deeply emotional journey of Owen and Leonard. From hiding in the shadows of a corporate gala to utterly dominating the boardroom as a united front. This story proves that true power lies in embracing exactly who you are. The chemistry, the corporate takedowns, the absolute devotion. It doesn't get much better than a fiercely protective Alpha and an Omega who completely owns his worth. If you love this story, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and hit subscribe, so you never miss another dramatic original romance.